The entirety of the Vinland Saga story all in one cohesive video. With the manga nearing conclusion, Vinland Saga will surely go down as one of the greatest seinen manga series of all time, and today we're going to be going over the full complete narrative of Makoto Yukimura's finest work. So sit back, relax, grab a snack, and of course, enjoy. Vinland Saga starts in 1013 AD England, inside a roughly 300-year-old, ruthless Northern European Viking clan. From Western Europe to Russia, Northern Africa to Greece, and even to the Middle East, this merciless Viking crew would appear abruptly in various places, murder and ravage entire communities, then leave just as quickly. Within a fierce battle scene between two Frankish armies, we meet the Viking crew's leader Askeladd, a powerful Welsh commander, observing the ongoing conflict on top a hill with his men, devising a deal he plans to strike with them. Upon seeing their armies retreat and overall lack of competence, Askeladd then orders an Icelandic warrior of his named Thorfinn to go and negotiate their leader an offer. He requests that Thorfinn relay an offer to their leader in which, for giving up half their spoils in war, Askeladd's Viking crew will help to fight alongside with them and aid them in their battle. Thorfinn agrees, but only on condition that if he does so, he shall be rewarded by a duel with Sir Askeladd himself. Askeladd snickers at this and tells Thorfinn that in order for that to happen, he must return to him with the severed commander's head. Thorfinn then starts down the hill to pass on Askeladd's proposal towards the clan, only to be met with immediate hostility by the Frankish soldiers, unfamiliar with his language and alarmed by his presence. He's initially attacked, but Thorfinn, being quick on his feet, reprimands a soldier, then demanding to be brought to their army's leader, to which he's granted. Upon hearing Askeladd's offer, the Frankish war general Japetha, a less than stellar commander and overall rotten person, angrily declines, sentencing Thorfinn to immediate execution. Seemingly unfazed by this, Thorfinn puts forth his own well-strategized plan to lead Japetha's army to victory. Entertained by his innovative strategy, Japetha then agrees that if Thorfinn's plan can indeed lead them to victory, his clan will be rewarded handsomely, but if it fails, Thorfinn is to be killed immediately. Now getting the green light, Askeladd's crew then prepares their raid in alliance with the Frankish army, which is ultimately successful for them, defeating the opposing army with Thorfinn quite literally taking the head of their commander-in-chief. Japetha, while impressed with their strength, plans to dupe Askeladd and his men from their share of the spoils, but upon checking his lot, it's revealed all the noble's riches had already been raided by Askeladd during the battle's commotion. Having defeated the opposing army and raiding the aligning one, Askeladd quickly tries to leave the scene, originally leaving Thorfinn behind, thinking after not seeing him on the ship, he had most likely passed away on the battlefield. That is, until he suddenly leaps out of the water onto the boat, wielding the commander's skull, then challenging Askeladd to the duel he was promised for doing so, to which Askeladd accepts, but only once they flee the scene. Upon returning from their voyage, Askeladd consults finances with his uncle and village accountant Gorm, an old greedy townsman who loves gold more than anything. Calculating how much it would cost to lodge and feed his men, Askeladd hastily assures their finances are all in good order, immediately ordering booze for his men to celebrate, with Gorm then demanding his slave Hordaland bring out the quote-unquote good wine. Amidst the celebration, Thorfinn and Askeladd began to properly duel each other as they promised. With a few swings thrown, it is here revealed Thorfinn's motive for wanting to fight Askeladd in the first place. Thorfinn wants to honorably kill Askeladd in battle as a way to avenge his late father, who had been savagely murdered by him in war, a death in which his soul still utterly mourns over. To which, in comparison, Askeladd couldn't be further removed from, having barely even remembered killing Thorfinn's father to begin with. Upon Askeladd insulting his deceased father, Thorfinn is enraged, losing his cool and charging him, which gets him swiftly defeated, Thorfinn then returning back to the ship to be alone. After a successful fight, a young boy consults Askeladd on why he would keep a soldier such as Thorfinn around, fearing that he may attack him while he was asleep or in some way harm him when he was off guard. To which Askeladd simply says he doesn't worry about that, as Thorfinn, being a good man, only wants to avenge his father in an honorable fashion. Later that night, Thorfinn vividly dreams of his father and is later accompanied by Horland, who brings him food. Horland expresses how she feels she relates to Thorfinn, to which he makes a clear distinction between him, a free man, and her, a slave. Thorfinn claims if he was in her shoes, he would simply kill his slave master and run away as far as possible. As they continue to speak, Thorfinn is reminded of an old fellow from back home in Iceland named Leif. Leif was a village senior known for telling tall tales of adventure, all in prophecy of a sacred land called Vinland. Vinland is a region south of Iceland Iceland filled with fertile soil, sweet fruit, and thriving plains as far as the eye can see. Leif's story commences when Thorfinn's father, arrives back at the home and the kids are put to bed. The next day, while shoveling snow off the road, Ylva, daughter of Thor's and sister of Thorfinn, finds a frostbitten slave passed out embedded in the snow. After alarming Thors, he then resurrects the ill slave, to which the man informs him that he has run away from his master Halfdan and now has nowhere else to go. Then simultaneously, without anyone's permission, Halfdan and his men are seen barging into the quiet village, armed and unwelcomed. Halfdan, being a wealthy, powerful, and most of all feared man, makes all villagers tense with his presence, with Leif even trying to smooth him over, but Halfdan is not having any of it. He claims he knows for certain his runaway slave is within this village, and demands his property be given back to him immediately. Finding the slave in Thor's company, Ylva, scared Halfdan might then think they were hiding him, claims they were only trying to nurse the young man back to good health before handing him back to Halfdan, to which Thor's completely sideguards, bluntly asking Halfdan to buy the slave from him. Halfdan refuses, saying he wants to use the slave as a lesson to the other slaves about what happens when you run away, to where Thor's offers up 4 ripe sheep for the young slave. Halfdan then claims he would have to double it for him to give him up, where Thor's outstandingly offers up 8 sheep, all for this dying young slave, much to the dismay of his family. After being bought, the slave then pretty much immediately dies, and is buried soon after by Thors and his family. We then cut to a real battle scene of England invading a Viking village, which is transitioned into a play fight between Thorfinn and the neighborhood children. Always claiming he dies early, while playing dead, Thorfinn is greeted by Leif, to whom is leaving to Norway in order to obtain wine for a religious ceremony. Helping him load for the voyage, a warship is then spotted in the distance, which, once ashore, a man named Floki requests to have a face-to-face with the troll of Jom. It is here revealed that Thors was once a part of the Jom's Vikings, one of the strongest warrior groups in all of Wendland, but has since left behind the warrior life, even faking his own death in favor of his quiet village in Iceland. Surprised, he somehow found him all the way in Iceland. Thors is then requested to aid Floki and his men in the war against the English in alliance with the Danish. Though initially declining, Floki makes it clear that Thors doesn't really have much of a choice here, as if he doesn't aid in the fight, he would be leaving his village and everyone he loves extremely susceptible to enemy attack. Begrudgingly, Thors is forced to prepare for war, with Leif also now not leaving for Norway, instead agreeing to come along to help man their warship. The night before Thors is set to leave for battle, Thorfinn, who had been showing strong prowess to someday be a great warrior, rummages around in his father's belongings to find a dagger. Seeing him do so, Thors reprimands the weapon, asking his only son what he plans to do with the blade, to which Thorfinn claims kill enemies, then telling him, "You have no enemies." The next day, Thor is ready to once again fight for the Jom's Vikings, goes to say goodbye to his son, but Thorfinn is nowhere to be found, only to be revealed once he takes off that Thorfinn had pulled a Monkey D. Luffy, hiding in a barrel on the ship in order to join them on the battlefield. Meanwhile, in the northern Atlantic, Floki had been bribing a cruel war general named Askeladd 100 coins in order to murder Thors, revealing that although an outstanding fighter for them, Thor's desertion of the Jom's Viking years ago was unacceptable, and he must be put to death because of it. Askeladd agrees on the condition that he is given an extra 100 gold coins up front, which Floki concedes. He then speculates the reason why Floki wouldn't just kill Thors himself, wondering just how powerful the troll of Jom is that Floki wouldn't even dare to take him on himself. Back on Thor's ship, he tells the story of how his firstborn child, Ylva, had come to be. Having conceived her while still a warrior, when it came time to naming his child, he was so preoccupied with war that he carelessly named his child Ylva, the very first name he thought of after his mother. But eventually, watching his daughter grow, he grew alongside with her, stating Ylva as the catalyst to why he fled from battle. Then arriving at Faroe Islands in order to do some trading, their ship is quickly seized by the likes of none other than Askeladd and his fearsome Viking crew. Having barricaded their ship in, Thors has no other choice but to fight, taking multiple warriors head-on all by himself. After defeating many troops with relative ease, he then confronts Askeladd, who he automatically presumes is their leader, to a duel on the condition that if he wins, Askeladd and his men leave, and if he loses, him and his men are to be of Askeladd's disposal. Asking how he so swiftly deciphered Askeladd as leader, Thor simply says his smell indicated him right away, which pleases Askeladd, then agreeing to his duel. The two then have a very strategically meticulous battle, with Thors narrowly beating Askeladd purely by mere wits. Thors then orders him to acknowledge his defeat, where Askeladd says he'd rather be killed than be embarrassed like that in front of his people. Still not executing him, Askeladd is amused by Thor's, wondering why a warrior as great as him would ever put down the blade, where Thor's calmly replies, "A true warrior needs no blade." Seemingly impressed, Askeladd then asks Thor to become chief of the Jomsvikings, only to then pretty much immediately try to play it off as a joke. Not finding it funny, one of his men leaps into Thor's ship and strong arms Thorfinn, holding him as prisoner beneath his blade. Thor then calls him out for not honorably following the rules of a duel, as Askeladd laughs this off, only being concerned with having Thor's killed, having no moral code whatsoever. Realizing the position he's in, Thor then tosses his blade into the water, sacrificing his life to save everyone else's. His last and only dying wish being that his son Thorfinn not be captured and continue to remain free, which Askeladd ultimately grants, before piping Thor's full of arrows, killing him on the spot. Completely destroyed, Thorfinn curses his father for dropping his weapon and giving his life, yelling that warriors do indeed need swords, promising he will kill Askeladd himself and avenge his deceased father. It's then cut to 1008 in England, where Thorfinn is being nursed back to good health by a kind English family despite a huge language barrier. While cleaning his hair of fleas, an English soldier comes to report to the family's residence a young Viking spy is loose nearby, and they are to be weary. He then notices Thorfinn, asking if it was the mother's son, where she says that he is, covering for Thorfinn as to not be seized, realizing in that moment that he is the one who the soldier was talking about. Later that night, Thorfinn warns the mother and daughter that they should run, then lighting a neighboring house on fire. This is done as a signal to give Askeladd and his Viking crew the green light to come pillage the town, with Thorfinn himself killing multiple innocent civilians, much to the horror of the woman who had just so graciously taken care of him. The story then again cuts to 5 years later, in the midst of a war between the Danes, led by King Sweyn, and the English in London. Askeladd, who is allied with Denmark, is surprised when he sees Thorkel the Tall, a war-loving madman, has sided with the English in battle. Amid the combat, Floki appears trying to sway Thorkel to join the Danish side, even offering him double the money as London is paying him. But Thorkel could completely care less, saying it was much more fun fighting for the English, not truly fighting for money at all. Thorfinn is then ordered to take Thorkel's head, which Thorfinn agrees to on the normal condition he is then given a proper duel. Thorfinn charges at Thorkel, initiating a one-on-one where Thorfinn holds his own until Thorkel grabs him by his hands and begins to manhandle him. Seeing this, Askeladd orders a retreat of his men, leaving Thorfinn to die in the hands of Thorkel. Asking if he was dead, Thorfinn swiftly slices off two of Thorkel's fingers, which delights him, then asking for the young Viking's name. Thorkel, once being a Jomsviking himself, recognizes Thor's name, but Thorfinn leaves no time for explanation, quickly fleeing into the water, opening the battle to be continued another day. Meanwhile, stationed in nearby barracks, King Sweyn tells Floki to lead his troops west, leaving Sweyn's son Sir Prince Canute in charge of 4,000 soldiers to hold down London, with the help of his much senior attendant Ragnar. But Floki is apprehensive about this, as Canute at this time has no battle experience, growing up soft in a Christian life of luxury. Thorfinn, badly injured, eventually catches up to Askeladd, who is approaching Wessex, telling Thorfinn that if he can't keep up, they will again leave him behind. Now in November of the same year, Thorfinn is seen dreaming again of his father, where he's told to drop his revenge and seek restitution, until his father is pumped full of arrows and Thorfinn wakes up to a gruesome scene of his comrades ready to, exploit a woman. Refusing to join, Thorfinn wanders to the village where barbaric men are drinking and eating, as well as discussing their battle trajectories, wondering why they are still pillaging small potato towns. Someone then says that there's always next year for bigger raids, where Bjorn wonders if there will even be a next year, thinking that by that time, Denmark will most likely have won the war. Suddenly, a fight breaks out between two soldiers, but Bjorn doesn't care to break it up, only telling them that when somebody dies to inform Askeladd. Finding Askeladd on a nearby hill, Thorfinn and him begin to talk, until a lone soldier from Ragnar's crew informs them that out of the 4,000 troops Canute had been in charge of, Thorkel had already killed 3,500 of them, seizing the prince as prisoner. He then asks for help from the main camp, where Askeladd surprisingly beheads the allied man, later explaining that they were better off saving the prince on their own as to receive the full reward for themselves. Thorkel and his men, with the prince and Ragnar hostage, are rummaging through a forest, with Ragnar and Thorkel discussing religion, two Christian men but with vastly separated devoutness. Ragnar then asks why Thorkel would ever attempt to battle with an army 10 times their size, where Thorkel says he's long lost his Norman warrior pride, only wanting to die in a true battle to make it up to Valhalla. They are then interrupted by an alcoholic friar named Willibald, who in a drunken stupor claims to be able to see be God. Thorkel finds this funny and asks who Willibald thought was better, Jesus or the Nordic gods, where he simply claims whoever created liquor. Thorkel then out of nowhere suddenly chucks a spear into the forest, killing a man, confirming his suspicions that they aren't alone. He's then approached by a soldier who informs Thorkel that they have them surrounded, where Thorkel immediately lets the captives free, but surprisingly still wants to battle in spite of this, claiming that running away now would just be cowardice. As the battle begins, Askeladd observes from a distance, then ordering his soldiers to arm their barrels and prepare in accordance with their plan. They then pour gasoline all around the forest, covering it in flames, with the smoke from the fire making it very difficult for Thorkel and his troops to see. Watching a deer catch on fire, Bjorn comments how he'd rather die in any other fashion than burning, where Askeladd agrees, but then says that the fire is more so only to confuse the enemies and capture the prince. He then orders Thorfinn off to go amend the prince, where Bjorn comments about how Askeladd seems to trust in Thorfinn, where Askeladd plainly states that Thorfinn is only an idiot who has no fear of death, which is very useful to him. Once in battle, Thorfinn again meets Thorkel, who comments on his father, saying that Thors was the only man he ever met stronger than himself. A burning tree then falls, interrupting the moment, leading Thorfinn to then continue to save the prince as he set out to, which he does do, then bringing the prince and other important men back to safety with Askeladd. Back in Askeladd's control, Canute is ordered to take off his helmet, where everyone remarks how he looks more like a princess than a prince. We're then cut to Askeladd and his band marching over the east bank of the river Severn in West England. He asks an old man on a ferry to deliver a scroll to anyone of authority on the other bank, saying to tell them it was sent from Askeladd, son of Lydia. They're then notified that Thorkel's troops are now less than a day march behind them, but Askeladd isn't scared. Despite claiming that Thorkel is much stronger than them, he had ordered reinforcement and wasn't concerned. Bjorn comments that Askeladd had been acting strange since seeing the prince's face, where Askeladd says he can tell a man just from their appearance, and Canute is surely no king. Continuing on their march, Askeladd is greeted by two cloaked gentlemen bowing at their presence, saying it's been a long time since they've met, then providing Askeladd with ships to his aid. Thorkel's forces are then notified of Askeladd's cross of River Severn as they reach the shore of Morganwag. Ragnar wants to use the ships to make ways back to Gainsborough, but Askeladd says that they'll be traveling inland, telling Thorfinn to keep guard of the prince. In return for providing them ships, Greidanus, one of the two cloaked individuals, only asks when Canute becomes king of England that he not interfere with Welsh matters. The prince meekly doesn't reply, instead trying to get Ragnar to take authority for him, but Greidanus just says he'll bring it up at another time. Marching into the mountains, all the Vikings dream of all the riches they shall receive for retrieving the prince, where Willibald says all he desires is love, a concept Viking men don't understand. Bjorn then relays news that the Danes are onto them, and in fact already have them surrounded. Archers then seem swarmed above on surrounding cliffs. They then directly aim and hit Askeladd's horse, but Askeladd makes sure his men remain calm and not fire back. The envoy approaching them is shocked Greidanus, a Dane, could speak the language of Wales, thinking Danish barbarians had no use for language. The two argue a bit, differing stances on Danes fighting the Welsh, while Askeladd and his crew of non-Welsh speakers are wondering if they're about to go into battle. Bjorn then states because they shot a horse instead of a person, there would not be a battle, as they were only trying to showcase to the crew the potential damage they can inflict. The envoy then says after a decade of watching the Danes and English in war, he doesn't want to make the same mistakes, and takes Canute as shield, as the king surely wouldn't harm his own here. Askeladd then graciously presents the prince to them, telling him to say something fierce, but Canute only cowers in fear, hiding behind Ragnar. Askeladd, a little ticked off, yells at the prince that although young, he is someday going to be king, and ought to have a little more assertiveness, with Ragnar then telling him off. Greidanus says Ragnar does not realize that always protecting Canute and speaking in his place is not doing him any favors, and notes that out of all the tasks they have, the bird flying with his own wings is the first one. Askeladd then negotiates with the envoy in Welsh, which confuses and saddens Bjorn. Being the member of Askeladd's crew who stayed the longest, over 10 years, he still never knew he spoke Welsh, and realizes how little him or anyone else really knows about Askeladd. He's just their ruthless ruler and not their friends. Askeladd informs the envoy that he is the son of Lydia and a descendant of the hero Arthur, showing that with his mixed heritage, he can fit well into Nordic society under Canute's rule, and have great power on Danish politics. The envoy is pleased, but asks how Askeladd's Nordic side can take precedent over his Danish side, where Askeladd bluntly states that he hates the Danes. The envoy then agrees to help Askeladd, and no fight breaks loose, with Askeladd's men acting as willing prisoners of the Welsh as a way to uphold the Welsh army's honor, but also not start a pointless conflict. While marching with the Welsh, Thorfinn antagonizes Canute about his incompetence, confidence, leading Canute to shout out Thorfinn and for once stand up for himself, shocking Ragnar as this is the first time Canute spoke to anyone besides him. Canute then eventually signs a document while strong winds pick up, and it seems although they may experience snowfall. Now stopping for rest, the Viking crew again attempts to decipher what Willibald, the drunken priest, means when he says love. Two sibling warriors asked if their bond for each other, never leaving the other's back on the battlefield, was love, where Willibald says while this is special, it isn't love. The men then speak on a time they encountered a warrior who fought with no sword. After many men of their group charged him, despite having a weapon, only fought with his fist, and when the battle was over, the Viking crew suddenly realized that nobody had actually died, the warrior only giving them a few broken bones at worst. They recalled him saying a true warrior needs no sword, where Willibald immediately realizes who it is they're speaking about. Now struck amidst a relentless blizzard, Ragnar again bothers Askeladd about turning back around, as they need shelter in order to survive the given weather. Where Askeladd simply says pillaging and raiding is a time-honored tradition of the Nordic people. We then see a Christian family praying before eating their meal, where one of the youngsters asks his father why they pray. The father says because Jesus says to, and he is the Son of God, and on the day of judgment, if they have been good, faithful people, they shall be led into the kingdom of heaven. But if they aren't faithful, they shall be tormented in hell for eternity. He says just like the Danes will someday be subject to. The eldest daughter of his, named Anne, then asked to use the bathroom, only to step outside and cry, as she had recently stolen a ring in the shops downtown and didn't want to end up going to hell because of it. Then, without notice, some of Askeladd's men burst into the quiet Christian home, stealing their food and rounding up their inhabitants. After attempting to stop them, Willibald is then tied to a tree and beaten by Askeladd, then saying him and his group have no love for Christians. After rounding up all 62 people of this small Christian village, Askeladd himself starts to hack off each and every single one of their heads, no matter if adult or child. The only person to survive being Anne, running away the second she saw her family brutally executed. Meanwhile, in Gainsborough, Floki tells King Sweyn that his son is missing, and due to current weather, no one can be sent out to rescue him until spring. The king then remarks that if he was half as competent as his brother Harold, he would never have gotten lost to begin with. Then in central England, Thorkel is saddened that it seems nearing the end of the war. Talking in a pub, it said that King Sweyn is likely going to be officially recognized as the King of England, with the English completely surrendering to Denmark in order to stop the war. Anne is then discovered passed out in the snow by a group of Christians. And then we see Willibald, Ragnar, and Canute praying for those who have died while Thorfinn watches. While in prayer, Willibald suddenly starts to question his god, saying he's now beginning to second guess his love for him, where Canute screams out that Willibald cannot call himself a Christian if he dare question the love of God, claiming there is no father who does not love his son. Thorfinn is then reminded of his own father. Thorkel then receives word of Askeladd's men being in a nearby small village, who, being a little bummed out about the war ending, is jumped with joy to again be able to fight Thorfinn. Askeladd then realizes he is being surrounded and tells his men to get ready for battle. Thorfinn then kills a rabbit, and Ragnar and Canute help him to prepare a stew. Finding it odd a noble knows how to cook, Thorfinn questions Canute, who says that while he enjoys cooking, he doesn't often get to do it, as last time he did, his father was appalled at his son doing slave labor. Amidst dinner conversation, a soldier informs them that the better part of their crew had been found by the English and were already in battle. Ragnar says he knew they should have went back to Wales, where the soldier says Askeladd is only planning to go further inland. Enraged, Ragnar then steps out to find Askeladd and give him a piece of his mind, where, covered in snow, an allied soldier pierces Ragnar with a spear, an assassination on Ragnar's life ordered by Askeladd. Requesting one last meeting with him, Ragnar, while dying in the snow, informs Askeladd that there are two parties for who is to be the heir of the throne, being those in favor of Canute and those in favor of his brother Harold, with King Sweyn himself wanting Harold to take rule, revealing that he only sent Canute to battle in order to have him die. Ragnar then asks Askeladd if he could only see the prince's face one more time, where Askeladd coldly says no, leaving Ragnar to die a pitiful death in the dead of winter. The prince and everyone else are then lied to, saying Ragnar had died at the hands of the English in battle. Askeladd is then seen torturing a Christian English soldier to spill the beans on what the English knows, even cutting off his fingers. But before he goes to cut off his nose, it's revealed Thorkel's troops are nearly upon them, now having to try and flee instantly. Here, much of Askeladd's men try to desert him and attempt to side with Thorkel, as Thorkel is still technically Danish, but everyone who does so is ripped to pieces the second Thorkel arrives. He then orders that his men kill everyone besides Thorfinn, as Thorkel wants to be the one to murder him himself. While he's fleeing, with his ability to know a man's character in a single glimpse, Askeladd then quickly realizes he has traitors among him and warns Thorfinn and Bjorn to get ready. Thorkel quickly catches up with Askeladd and a conflict starts on sight. Knowing he can't beat Thorkel head on, Askeladd continues trying to flee, but this is where the bulk of his crew disagree with him, with the traitors Askeladd had picked out now standing up to him and demanding he give the prince up as well. Realizing most of his crew is going to turn on him, Askeladd finally gets to speak his truth, saying he hated each and every single one of his men with every fiber of his being, then saying racist Danish remarks before chopping off the traitors' heads. With Askeladd already knowing they had a backstabber, Bjorn, Thorfinn, Canute, and Willibald by association already had a sled pact and were able to run straight away, but had to at least momentarily leave Askeladd behind. Bjorn is then offered to join in betraying Askeladd, but he holds his ground, claiming to be one of his soldiers through and through, and is then attacked because of it. Askeladd then begins to kill a few more of his once men until he realizes he's now in deep shit, now being surrounded by both Thorkel and his own former troops. He then dreams of his mother and the mystical land of Avalon, where all trouble ceases once being. Askeladd then convinces the men that they must keep him alive, as him, Bjorn, and Thorfinn are their strongest fighters, and with Askeladd dead, who is to fight off pursuers of the king. So instead of killing him, they shoot his legs full of arrows, with Thorkel then arriving face to face with Askeladd and Thorfinn running back on horse to attack. One of the traitors then tries to get Thorkel in on their plan, but he's disinterested, only enamored with Askeladd, who he heard was a very strong warrior, ordering his men to kill everyone else. Thorfinn then arrives, much to the pleasure of Thorkel, all while yelling that he is not to murder Askeladd, as Thorfinn is going to be the one to kill him. Thorfinn and Thorkel then ignite a continuation of their original duel. Meanwhile, Canute dreams of being reunited with Ragnar, where, while happy for the life he has given Canute, Ragnar realizes that he hadn't truly raised him as he had ought to have, letting him grow soft in a comfortable life of nobility. Canute wishes that he could have been Ragnar's son, where Ragnar tells him that he must grow up and now fend for himself, as he is dead and never coming back. Canute then wakes up to Bjorn fending him off from oncoming attackers. Prince Canute then laments about losing the one person in the world who really loved him, where Willibald questions Canute on if Ragnar really had even loved him to begin with. Canute then asks Willibald that if Ragnar had not loved him, then who in the world truly embodied love, where Willibald points to the nearest deceased soldier and says it is him. He says that people do not kill, steal, or sin and are most beautiful because of it, saying the love people have for each other is only discrimination, the same as having loyalty to a king or whipping a slave. Enamored by his profoundness, Canute then cries out, asking why the world is so full of beauty, but there is none in the hearts of men. Then after murdering all enemies, Thorkel's troops are surprised to find that him and Thorfinn are still dueling, with Thorkel's fights usually not lasting more than seconds. Thorkel asks Thorfinn what makes a true warrior, but Thorfinn ignores him and only continues the battle, then being flung by Thorkel into the sky. Bjorn, after defeating all attackers and strung out on mushrooms, putting him in not a straight mind, proceeds to attack the prince, but it isn't the same Canute he was just moments earlier. Now angry at God for the ways of human nature, Canute takes his anger out on Bjorn, who, being a warrior himself, embodies everything wrong with humans. But instead of attacking him, he embraces him, saying if humans are obstructed from paradise because of Adam and Eve, then we have no choice but to recreate paradise with their own hands. He then says he shall give their struggle and their lives a proper meaning, as that is the calling set for a king. Now back between the battle with Thorfinn, Thorkel tells about Thorfinn's father and the Jomsvikings, revealing that Helga's father was in fact the head of the Joms, making Thorfinn both the grandson of the Jomsviking leader and the nephew of Thorkel. He then goes into story about how Thor's presumably died, but then reveals that he knows this wasn't in fact the moment of Thor's actual death. He tells a tale about how 27 years earlier he had been reunited with Thor's after his supposed death, but it was not the same Thor as he thought he once knew. He only returned in order to reunite with his wife and daughter, then planning to take them along to live a new life of peace, never wanting to associate with the Jomsvikings ever again. Angrily, Thorkel starts a fight with him, but he is defeated quickly, even without Thor's using a blade, which had been the last time he ever saw him. Knowing of Thor's actual death 15 years later, Thorkel inquires what he was like growing up in Iceland with Thorfinn, where Thorfinn immediately jumps at him but is quickly repressed by Askeladd. Askeladd tells him that he's in much worse shape than he realizes, and if he wants to make it out of this battle alive, he shall do as he says. Part of Thorkel's troops are ordered to go retrieve Canute, who, thinking he's a pushover, are stunned when they encounter the newly improved prince who isn't just going to take their crap, only going with them to beat Thorkel on his own fruition. Thorfinn back in fight with Thorkel and now being coached by Askeladd is able able to rip his eye out, shocking everyone in surrounding who thought Thorfinn a much weaker warrior. As this is unfolding, Prince Canute arrives and commences the battle be done at once. Thorkel, then realizing he lost, does stop fighting, but not because of Canute, only because of upholding the honor of a battle. Thorfinn then says to Askeladd that they should leave now while they're ahead, where surprisingly, Askeladd says Thorfinn may go, but he's staying here, as now it's only starting to get good. Canute tells Thorkel that he is to be let go immediately, but Thorkel said that's not gonna happen, as Canute being prisoner is his golden ticket to huge fortune. Canute then says that he is severely mistaken, as his father does not love him and only wishes that Thorkel kills him. He's not the golden goose they thought him out to be. He says that he wishes to go back freely to Gainsborough in order to kill his father and take the throne that is rightfully his. Wanting to see if he's really serious, Thorkel fakes a punch at him to see if he's truly a man of honor, but much to his surprise, Canute doesn't flinch, even to the likes of Thorkel the Tall. Realizing that he is serious and in the moment reminding him of Thor's, Canute is willingly let go by Thorkel and starts his voyage to kill the king, now even with both Thorkel and Askeladd and all their men in his corner. Canute then returns to Gainsborough, much to the surprise of Floki and his father, who thought for sure he'd have died. He then orders Floki to set a meeting up with his father later that afternoon. Canute, Thorkel, and Askeladd discuss how they plan to kill the king, with Canute writing that Thorkel get back in good graces with Denmark as the first step. Canute then says he feels as though God is currently looking down on him and says he wants to make his kingdom once again prosperous. Bjorn, who had been critically injured in battle, was also given a room to heal up in, but it seemed although he might not make this one out alive. Canute, Thorfinn, and Askeladd then meet with the king, but quickly realize that they're being set up and it's an ambush, but Canute tells them not to draw their swords. The king and his son both have a bit of small talk with one another, but both parties know they really just want each other dead. The king then gives his son an ultimatum. Either he be granted a quiet, peaceful life in the countryside, or he die to his father then and there, kneeling before him atop the throne. Askeladd then pleads for the king to pardon Canute, as now having ties to Thorkel, he may be able to inherit great fortunes in London by the end of the war. The king then agrees, saying that there shall be a feast held within the coming days in the prince's name, and they shall be in attendance. Canute then tells Askeladd to back off with confronting the king, as while he does wield great power, wanting to be known as a wise king above all else, he cannot do more than just threaten them, and it's better to appear within his grasp. We then see Thorkel enjoying himself to be back in Denmark, drinking with some locals, where an unknown Christian boy is out drinking even the toughest of soldiers. It's then revealed that this is in fact none other than Willibald, just now clean shaven and with a haircut. Canute and Askeladd then discuss dethroning the king, both agreeing that it be in their advantage to hold off at least for the time being. They also tell their plan to a man named Gunnar, who had some noble ties and was the brother of Ragnar, who they commissioned to help aid in their affairs. Askeladd then speaks to one of the men who betrayed him in the heat of battle, who is now leaving back to his original home. He shockingly gives him a gold bracelet as present and tells him he should grow a farm and raise children, as he's not cut out to be a warrior, then telling him that if he ever sees him again on the battlefield, he will gut his insides out, whether friend or foe. Askeladd and Thorfinn are then seen gearing up for their duel as Thorfinn's reward for keeping the prince safe, but not before Bjorn steps onto the battlefield. Knowing he is dying, Bjorn wants to be killed by a strong warrior like Askeladd, as means to secure a spot in Valhalla. They start the duel where Bjorn asks Askeladd how he can live with being so lonely, hating everyone he goes to battle with and even hating himself. Bjorn then tells Askeladd that he only wanted to be friends, where Askeladd tells Bjorn that he is in fact his one and only friend, as he stabs him in the heart, sending him up to Valhalla. Directly after killing Bjorn, his longest lasting comrade and loyalist man, Askeladd immediately begins to duel Thorfinn as if nothing ever happened. He even throws his weapon, much the same as Thor's did, and tells Thorfinn all he needs is his hands to wrangle him up, which, after Thorfinn charging him, he does with complete ease, telling him that he's grown tired of their duels as Thorfinn's tactics have become tiresome and boring to him. He then ridicules Thorfinn about how he has no beauty or grace in battle, much the same as all the other Norsemen, before going into detail about the first time he ever killed someone, his own father. He had been born of a slave mother and spent most of his early days doing dirty work covered in ash, which is how he got the name Askeladd, Ash Lad. His father, however, was a respected Norse leader who, only getting with his mother for temporary pleasure, wanted nothing to do with Askeladd and didn't even treat him although his own, since he was born a slave. His mother would often tell him about Avalon, the home of the hero Arturus, which was a utopia no human could ever imagine, who would one day come back and bring his people people to Avalon along with him. But now, deep into a depressive reality in adulthood, Askeladd doesn't believe this tale whatsoever, claiming that even if it was real, Arceus would never return to a place as horrible as this one. He then goes into how at age 11, his mother had completely lost it, mistaken his father as being Arceus himself, who, confused by the delirious woman, pulled out his sword to kill her. In attempts to save her, Askeladd picked up a sword for the very first time in defense for his mother, saying that while he had never used one, he already knew exactly how to use it. He then duels with his father before he is ultimately defeated, but instead of killing him, realizing that Askeladd is of his blood, tells him that he may now live with him as he has great potential for one day being a great warrior. He then waited 2 years, being the best son a father could ask for, until while asleep with his guard down, he snuck into his bed and murdered his very own father. He even used the sword of his brother most indifferent towards his father, leading everyone to blame the killing on him, which had him hung because of it. Then wrapping up the story by saying Thorfinn has had 10 years of battle with Askeladd and still hasn't won, and was a fool because of it. Canute, now knowing he is of royal lineage, asks Askeladd why he not seek the throne, where Askeladd says he's nothing more than a Viking. 5 days later, a man named Leif comes into the town of York looking for a certain Icelandic warrior. It's then revealed that Leif has gone to countless slave auctions in the past 11 years since Thorfinn went missing in order to find him, as he says as a duty to repay Thor's. Askeladd and Canute are then seen discussing matters about the king, where Leif then recognizes Askeladd as the man who killed Thor's. While this is happening, a hooded figure is then seen loading up a crossbow and shooting the prince as an assassination attempt from his father, which sends the village into chaos. Thorfinn, who had watched the whole thing, chases the hooded individual down and kills him, all while right next to Leif, who recognizes him instantly and goes into utter disbelief. Who then, asking if he was indeed Thorfinn, son of Thor's, is instantly recognized by Thorfinn, and the two embrace while Leif begins to cry. It's then also revealed that the person shot was not actually the prince. Instead, in anticipation that he may be murdered, a female slave lookalike was temporarily held in his place. Rejoicing in each other for the first time in 11 years, Thorfinn and Leif discuss their lives, where Leif says that Thorfinn must come home at once to see his family, as his mother had fallen very ill and his sister had many children who would love to meet him. Thorfinn only wants to talk about two things though, killing Askeladd and finding Vinland, where Leif realizes Thorfinn wasn't the same bright-eyed kid he once remembered. Askeladd then figures out that Gunnar is a spy working in accordance with the king, but instead of outright killing him, they plan to use him to their advantage. The day of the feast in Canute's name arrives, and many high-ups come in attendance to this extravagant showing. All the main characters up to this point who, well, haven't died are in attendance of the ceremony, all except Thorfinn, who stayed outside wanting nothing to do with nobility. The king then goes into speech thanking everyone that helped him into fruition of now becoming king over England, and then publicly honors his son, hugging him. He then publicly gives his son the lot of Mercia, one of the fertilest of all lands throughout England. He then blames the assassination attempts on his son on Wales, saying that they will invade them in the coming spring, which immediately alarms Askeladd as this is his place of origin. Then called up by the king to receive 50 pounds of silver, who then says he's looking forward to his help with the invasion on Wales, knowing that Askeladd has strong connections to the country. Then in astonishment, while kneeling for him, Askeladd questions the king on his military apparatus, a feat which would have any common man killed on the spot. The king then agrees to hear him out, where Askeladd goes into a plan of instead of invading Wales, he is sent as a voice of reason to their king to sort things out, which amazingly the king actually agrees to. But not until he whispers into Askeladd's ear, telling him Wales or Canute. Choose. Where all Askeladd says in return is that he doesn't believe a crown should be sworn across such an ugly, wretched face, but this time not in a whisper. Guards then go to attack Askeladd until he draws a sword and tells them to back off, as he is in reach of killing their highness. He then reveals his true name, Lucius Arduris Castus, exclaiming himself as the rightful king of Britannia right as he slices the king's head off. Graciously nodding for his sacrifice, Canute then orders his men to have Askeladd slain, where Thorfinn runs in after hearing the commotion. Askeladd then begins to kill countless royal guards, all while screaming that the king of Britannia will oblige you. Floki then tries to unguard Askeladd, where Canute jumps in, landing a very clean shot right in Askeladd's heart, right in front of Thorfinn, the person who wanted to kill Askeladd for himself. Askeladd then says for his first time ever stabbing someone, the prince had done it gracefully, before collapsing right on the Danish castle floor. Thorfinn then rushes in, where Askeladd tells him that here's his last chance to kill him and avenge his father. Where Thorfinn is thrown thrown into a fleet of rage, yelling that this is not supposed to be the manner in which his prophecy of killing Askeladd is fulfilled. Where Askeladd simply says, while dying on the ground, "Haven't you given any thought to what you're gonna live for after I'm dead, Thorfinn?" Telling him to be a true warrior, son of Thor's, before dying in Thorfinn's arms. Infuriated, the prince stole his life's mission. He lashes at him, but is quickly reprimanded. A heat-of-the-moment gesture of wrath that would later put him into a life of slavery because of it. Prince Canute then grabs his deceased father's crown and names himself the official king of England, here at chapter 54, ending the war arc of the Vinland Saga story. We're then immediately cut to a group of slaves on a ship where a sickly woman is barbarically thrown off the boat by two men. A man we later know named Einar cries out about the injustice, but he's quickly told to pipe down if he knows what's good for him. Being new to the trade himself, he very quickly realizes that slaves are no different than that of cows or pigs in the eyes of their owners. Einar is then seen being auctioned off as a slave, where a master takes a romantic interest in him, before asking if they had any slaves cuter. He then escapes, but quickly realizes this is harder than he thought, getting caught and reprimanded rather soon after. Einar also quickly loses hope, figuring it's much better to just suck it up and be the best slave he can than having a life on the run in a foreign nation. He's then auctioned off again to leave, but he makes it clear he's only looking for a certain slave, not a worker. He then eventually is bought by a slave master named Kettle and taken to a farm in Jutland, Denmark. Once he arrives, he's told he will work to chop down trees in a nearby forest so Kettle may grow another wheat farm, with help from another slave named Thorfinn, who'd grown quite a bit since the last time we've seen him. He then tells them that he's basically giving them the forest, telling them that they can plant their own harvest and he'll buy it at a proper rate, saying that in 3 years' time they could be free of slavery if they work diligently. Hearing this, Einar is jumped with joy, as this is vastly, and I mean vastly, more considerate than any slave master of the time period. Despite being told to rest for the day and shadow Thorfinn, Einar immediately pitches to start hacking away at the large lot. They are then brought food by much less nice, mean-spirited slave masters who give them very poor rations, especially in comparison to the amount of work they're doing. This leaves a poor taste in Einar's mouth, who isn't quite yet accustomed to living as a slave, where later that day he tries to tell the much nicer Kettle about his experience with his men. But instead of complaining, he gets awestruck by a beautiful woman and then quickly changes his mind about his feelings of his surroundings. Kettle is actually seen working in the field himself too, where he is less than impressed with his son Olamar's work and attitude. While he's soon to inherit his father's big gracious farm, he's completely disinterested and wants to be a warrior instead. Later that night, Einar calls him foolish for wanting to be a warrior, saying that warriors were all beasts. He then explains how when a child, English warriors had come and burned his village to the ground, then later being pillaged yet again by the Danes. We then see Olimar in a room with a young peasant girl where he claims he can't wait to use a sword to prove himself to King Canute and fight for the English. The girl then asks if she can do the you-know-what with him, where he quickly realizes she's only with him in hopes to have a child and one day inherit his farm. He then rides out on horse into the fields where he is heckled by two drunken peasants. He then tests one of the men to a duel, but is swiftly apprehended. Olimar then starts crying, so as ways to cheer him up, the men then say all he needs is a confidence booster, where killing one of his slave men would be a perfect way to do so. Thorfinn is then seen having a very bad nightmare as he attempts to sleep. We then see Einar have an encounter with the girl he previously admired, who we learn is named Arnheid, where she calls him handsome, also telling him that she is a slave just like himself. Einar and Thorfinn are then commissioned by two higher up men and are lured into fighting Olimar. While Einar is fending off from Olimar, Thorfinn volunteers to take his place, where another man starts slicing at him, but Thorfinn isn't scared. He says he no longer fears death, and in all the days he's been alive, not one good thing has ever happened, then getting the top of his ear minced off before a man named Snake comes and breaks everything up. He also throws a fist at Thorfinn, which he reflexively flinches at, then saying that obviously his body does in fact fear death. The next day, due to injury, Thorfinn and Einar are told that they don't have to work, but both still do anyways, where Einar asks Thorfinn if he'd ever been to war. Saying yes, he then asks how many people he killed, where Thorfinn quite literally can't remember, due to how many it's now been. Hating war, Einar despises this, and later that night goes to strangle Thorfinn, but doesn't, as he sees he's having a bad nightmare again. We then hear that Canute's transition into king after his father's death wasn't as smooth as one thought, with England going back into war with Denmark and Canute having to share the throne with another king named Ethelred. We then see the current state of Mercia, where heads are being put on spears and homes pillaged, much to the dismay of Canute, who wants to calm down the war. Canute then speaks with Floki about current affairs, where he is interrupted by an angry Thorkel telling the prince off for stopping him a battle. He then tells Canute that war is unavoidable and that he's doing nobody any good by not maneuvering his people accordingly. Canute then meets with a man offering a deal of jewelry Jules to call out his forces in Mercia, but he declines. Instead, striking up a deal that if he helps in killing the other king Ethelred, he will retract from Mercia. The man, who has close ties to Ethelred, initially declines, but Canute then intimidates him into agreeing, after showing just how powerful he is. King Ethelred then dies soon after, where his son takes the throne, but he too gets killed by Canute, where he then gets crowned ultimate king of England without having to share the throne. We then defer back to Denmark, where Thorfinn and Einar, hard at work, realize that they need a horse in order to properly do some of the labor. Eventually, an old brittle man named Sverkel agrees to lend them one as long as they pay their due and work to earn it. After receiving the horse, Thorfinn tells Einar that growing up in battle, he never tended to fields before and didn't know anything about growing plants, but is reassured by Einar that when the time comes, they will be fine as he is well versed in farming. Thorfinn and Einar are then accused of stealing their horse, where they said they got it from Sverkel, where he's then revealed to be Ketil's father and the most important person on the entire farm. He's then seen being told by Ketil that he must stop working as he's getting too old, but Sverkel refuses. Thorfinn and Einar are then invited by Sverkel to join for dinner, where we learn Snake, who is also in attendance, is nighttime security for the village as his job. But Sverkel calls him useless as they already pay King Harold, Canute's brother, twice a year as to protect the village. We then cut to October and we learn that the farm is indeed experiencing a recurring case of low-level thievery. Snake is then seen having caught the thieves he was after, being two young brother and sister respectively, telling Ketil to punish them as he saw fit. Where it cuts to a scene of after receiving a gift of severed ears from his brother Thorgil, Olimar, disgusted, is then told of how his father got the nickname Iron Fist Ketil. During his time in war, once battle commenced, he became a beast of a man and would tear through entire fleets, only wielding his bare hands. We then learn that the two young thieves are in a tough circumstance with a sickly mother and only stole in order to keep them alive. Ketil's son Thorgil says that they shall have one arm cut off each as punishment, but Ketil disagrees, only sentencing them to working off their debt and a few beatings with a stick. Thorgil then pulverizes the young boy with his first beating, leading Ketil to stop him and finish off the lashing himself, which he struggles with heavily. We then find out that the tales of Iron Fist Ketil were actually a lie, and in reality, he was a very compassionate man who hated violence. Thorfinn then has the same reoccurring nightmare. Einar tells him that in his sleep, he was yelling something about his father in Askeladd, where Thorfinn then tells him about his 11-year conquest to avenge his father that never came into fruition. He then says that since then, his life has had no purpose. He doesn't even hate Askeladd anymore and now just feels completely empty, realizing he has no other skills than violence as a warrior. Overhearing their conversations, Sverkel then puts the two to work, where while fishing for the old man, he tells Thorfinn being empty only means anything can fit inside you and he has plenty of space to improve. Once they get back to their field for work, it's revealed that all Thorfinn and Einar's crops had been destroyed by some outside force. Knowing this was the doing of the cruel farmhands, Einar is enraged and tells Thorfinn he's going to go kill them, but Thorfinn talks him out of it as he knows confronting them will only cause more issues. Then days later, by a chance occurrence, they do indeed encounter the farmhands, who, after insulting them, is punched square in the face by Thorfinn, enraged by their arrogance. An all-out brawl between everyone then cuts loose. Knocked out, we finally see the nightmare Thorfinn has been having in its entirety, where Thor scolds his son for all the murder he's committed, and then the dead bodies of those he's killed drag him down into what he thinks is Valhalla. But the Valhalla depicted is not the same as the Norse warriors had imagined, more so resembling hell than a paradise in Thorfinn's mind. Askeladd is there present, who tells him that he's not in Valhalla, but the real world for warriors, where everyone is your enemy and you can't trust a soul. Still being dragged by the weight of everyone he's killed, Thorfinn apologizes for his actions and then says he will strive to start his life fresh again and become a true warrior. Thorfinn then wakes up, where while greatly injured, him and Einar did win the fight against the farmhands. He then vows that as of today, he will never harm another person. Ketil then hears about his slaves attacking his men, but lets Thorfinn and Einar off without punishment, as he says it's only fair for what the farmhands had done to them. We're then cut to 1018 in Denmark, where Canute is being waken up as his ship had landed in Jelling, his home village. This is in order to meet with his brother, as while Canute is the king of England, his brother is the king of Denmark, and has recently fallen ill without a heir. His brother Harold tells Canute he will give the throne to him, but all Canute can see is disillusions of his deceased father's head that work as his inner conscious, repulsed by what he's done with power. He then talks to his dead father's head about how he was the one who poisoned Harold to receive his power, realizing he's become even worse than the father he worked so hard to overcome. Back on the farm with Thorfinn and Einar, they are hard at work as usual. We then get to see the two as they chop down their final tree, concluding their 3-year timeshare of being slaves. Having never thought they'd make it this far, they ask each other what they plan to do when free, with neither really having a real plan for what comes next. Einar says he wishes he could have Arnheid wherever he goes, where Thorfinn blatantly blatantly ask him if he'd like to eliminate warfare and slavery. Kettle then assures the men that they are soon to be free once he gets back from a journey to pay his respects to the dying king in Jelling. Snake then wakes up from a nap, wondering where Sverkel is, as this is usually the time he'd make supper, then running into the field to find Sverkel had fallen while working in the sun. While Sverkel is seen healing in what might be his deathbed, Snake is told of a runaway slave in a nearby village and is tasked with capturing him. We then see Canute, newly acquitted with rule over Denmark, is in need of funds to pay for his troops, where he devises a plan to steal from Denmark farmers in order to not have to raise taxes. Kettle then arrives in Jelling with his sons and hears word of King Harald's death, which leads him into wanting to acquire good graces with the new king Canute. His son Almar, being his usual idiot self, then picks a fight with another young man named Bug-Eyes, who's revealed to be Leif's son once Kettle arrives and breaks up the scuffle. We then learn Bug-Eyes' real name is Thorfinn and was only bought by Leif, thinking he could be the Thorfinn we know, who obviously wasn't, but after inquiring Kettle, realizes might be residing in his farm. Kettle and his sons have a meeting with Canute, who is pleased by the crops they grow, but gets interrupted by Almar being an imbecile. He attempts to gain admission into Canute's army by showing him his work with a sword, where, after displaying very subpar strength, is still let in due to the leverage him and his family may give to the king, with someday taking their land. Before he knows he's in, though, he's heckled by some local warriors and gets into a fight, where after his brother Thorgil gives him proper motivation, he actually kills one of the men in a duel, and Thorgil slaughters the rest. But after actually killing someone, he realizes it's not everything it's cracked up to be. Kettle then finds out that the only reason his son's hecklers were sent was to begin a duel so they may arrest him, and quickly flees Jelling by Leif's boat because of it. Canute then orders that they invade Kettle's farm, where his dead father's soul tells him he's resembling his old man more and more. Back on Kettle's farm, people are still hard at work trying to catch this escaped slave, and Thorfinn started listening to when Snake reads the dying Sverkel the Bible, being particularly interested in the forgiving thy enemy parts of the Gospels. The runaway slave named Gardar then reunites with Arnheid, who is revealed to be a past husband of hers, even being pregnant with his child. He then attacks Snake, who begins the battle with him, where Einar retractably gets an axe and charges in to kill the runaway, before Thorfinn stops him and asks if he's really capable of using that axe and actually killing someone. The runaway slave is eventually defeated and captured by Snake, who is planning to turn him in for a reward. Arnheid then reveals to Thorfinn and Einar that she had not seen her husband since he had gone off to war, lost, then both their soldiers and her village were pillaged by Vikings and made into slaves. Arnheid then sneaks out to bandage her husband up, where while alone with a single guard, Gardar attacks him and manages to free himself from his confines, then killing any witnesses. Thorfinn and Einar are then seen discussing slavery and war, where Thorfinn speaks on how Nordic society honors those of whom live by the sword and carry slaves, and why this is such a corrupt mentality. Thorfinn then says that he owes the world everything he's savagely taken away from it, and then some, and vows to one day set his record straight and redeem himself in the eyes of a higher power by creating his own village utopia in Vinland. But amidst their deep conversation, Snake and his men show up and begin to tear through their barn looking for the again escaped slave. After fleeing to warn Arnheid, she has a complete mental breakdown where Einar agrees to help her leave on the run. Back with Sverkel and Snake, the dying old man offers his share of the farm as a passing gift to Snake, hoping he'd take up a simpler, peaceful life, but he only continues trying to capture the slave. Thorfinn is then seen trying to transport Gardar off the farm by a carriage, but is caught by Snake, who tells him he will kill him if he doesn't hand the man over. They arm the fight, where Askeladd Spirit haunts Thorfinn, asking if he's really going to break his peace promise and fight yet again. They have an extremely tense fight, where Thorfinn only uses his bare fist, but in a moment of triumph, Snake reaches over and stabs Gardar, presumably killing him, until he leaps out, strangling Snake unconscious, leaving the farm with Arnheid, but barely makes it out of the village before collapsing and dying due to his fatal stab wound. Thorfinn and Einar are later tied up and held fugitive for helping Gardar escape, and Arnheid is being watched too. While this is happening, Canute, Floki, and Wolf set sail to go invade Kettle's farm in Jutland. Kettle then arrives back from his trip to Jelling and is extremely shaken up, only wanting to see Arnheid, but is broken when he hears of what happened when he was gone. Thorgil, however, who is considerably less scared or upset, prepares to man the village for the oncoming attack by the prince, stationing Almar on the front lines, although he's a lot less excited about battle now. Leif, who had tagged along only in order to take back Thorfinn, began searching for him on the farm. When Kettle finally finds Arnheid, he violently beats her with a stick, and not even stopping when she tells him she's pregnant with his child. Only when Snake steps in does the beating commence. After this, Kettle is struck mad and fires up his farmhands about going into war with Canute, despite their severely lacking numbers, especially compared to the royal guards. Leif does find Thorfinn, but due to current circumstances, circumstances, says he will not be leaving with him back home to Iceland, as he is now a free man and wants to rather protect Arnheid. The prince at last arrives at Jutland and gives Kettle an ultimatum. Either he leaves the country freely and gives up his farm, or goes into battle with King Canute. He is given less than 24 hours to make this decision. Scoping out their competition, Snake realizes the king's manned with warriors of the Jom's Vikings, and they don't stand a chance. But despite this, Kettle still persists on going into war, and Snake goes along with him as he says to pay his due for all Kettle has done for him through the years, despite knowing this fight will ultimately be futile. He then tells the other farmhands that the prophecies of Iron Fist Kettle are stories of another man, who this Kettle only pirated as he has the same name, and in reality has no military experience at all. The battle then starts, where Thorfinn, Einar, and Arnheid quickly flee by horse and carriage to try and escape the battle. Unsurprisingly, Kettle's troops are pulverized and they retreat quickly after, against the word of Kettle, who tells them to keep fighting. He then grabs one of his slaves and asks why he is still retreating despite Kettle saying otherwise, where the slave explains to him Kettle is in fact a slave to the king himself, and is pretty clearly going to be killed for opposing him, so therefore he holds no more power over him. He says everyone is a slave to those of whom are stronger, where Kettle, internalizing his words, is taken unconscious by Canute's soldiers. As this is happening, Thorgil sneaks up on the king and the two begin to duel, but a guard of the king quickly takes him aback and he's forced to flee. Back with Thorfinn and Einar, Arnheid awakes and asks where they are going, where the men inform her that they don't yet know, but somewhere away from the ongoing battle. Arnheid then says that she knows where she is going, a place without slaves and a place without war, soon after letting herself die in the carriage, reuniting with her family in the afterlife. Snake then finds Kettle's unconscious body and carries him until he catches up with Thorfinn and Einar. But Einar is infuriated to see Kettle, the root of all Arnheid's problems, and motions to fight until Thorfinn blocks him, attempting to not make matters worse. Where shockingly, Einar punches Thorfinn square in the face, only leaving Thorfinn no other choice but to hit him back and render him immobile. While on the ground, Thorfinn tells him that his anger will only lead to more pain and more death, so he ought to act proper. He then speaks on Vinland and that they will all one day live there in eternal worldly bliss away from the troubles of their daily life. Einar then and there agrees that in Arnheid's memory they shall together form a divinely peaceful nation in Vinland. Meanwhile, Canute, drastically beating Kettle, issues a second chance to surrender, even with barely any of Kettle's men still living. Initially, Thorgil is given the decision, as Kettle is in no shape to decide himself, for not wanting to budge at all, says he only wishes to continue on in battle. That is, until the technical real heir to the throne Almar steps up, and after exchanging heart on the ways of battle, after experiencing it firsthand, says they shall surrender. This angers Thorgil. Now with Arnheid dead, Thorfinn has no reason to stay any longer, and initially packs up to leave with Leif, but at the last second, with a change of fate, decides he can't leave Kettle alone on the farm to die, and turns back around to be of his aid. He attempts to speak with Canute by telling his royal guards that he himself was once a royal guard to the king, but the other guards only start beating him, thinking he's lying. Thorfinn not giving up trying to talk to them, but also not fighting back against the beating, Canute is eventually informed that Thorfinn by name has requested to see him, but even knowing who it is, declines the meeting, only letting Thorfinn to further be beaten by his men. The men even start betting on how many shots Thorfinn can stomach before retreating, where Thorfinn joins in, betting on himself that if he can man 100 sturdy hits, he shall be granted a chat with Canute. Where amazingly, Thorfinn eats 100 separate blows to the skull, with the crowd being shocked and Thorfinn's face being unrecognizable. They then clearly see that he wasn't lying about once being one of the prince's guards, and ask why he not just fight back in order to prove this. Where Thorfinn plainly says, who negotiates for peace by beating a man. Thorfinn and by proxy Einar then speak with the king to clamor together some type of peace, but Canute is disinterested. Einar then spouts at Canute, commending him of his evil, where Thorfinn asks him if this was really the paradise on earth he had prophesied in Gainsborough. Canute then goes into a spiel on how a paradise on earth is impossible because we are all sinners under God and must suffer because of it, and instead realizes power in and for Viking society is the only real paradise, admiring himself as being stronger than even God. He then tells Thorfinn either he kills him then and there, or his ruthless rule to the throne will only get worsened. Where Thorfinn says in that case, all he'll do is run. There's no point in fighting for them both to die right then and there. He's better off just running to a place Canute's power can't seize him. Canute finds this hysterical and calls Thorfinn the biggest fool he's ever met, as he just took a severe beating only to ask if he'd stop attacking, planning to just run if this menial ploy didn't work out. But Thorfinn only persists, telling him he will not bother him with his affairs and will only simultaneously try to build a civilization by different means, and only wishing for Canute to help in doing so, where shockingly Canute gives in, surrendering the farm and letting Thorfinn do as he pleases, realizing at that moment Thorfinn is the only person he knows he can relate to as ruler, as both are only trying to run a community the best way they see fit. In aftermath of the battle, Kettle is put into retirement where Almar and Snake do most of the farm work in hopes to earn back the money the fight had cost the farm. Thorgil, however, leaves the farm on his own and is never heard from again. After that, everyone says their goodbyes and Thorfinn and Einar embark to go out and create Vinland, where as they're leaving, Snake yells out his real name to them, Roald, son of Grimm. Leif also agrees to help them in their journey so long as Thorfinn first stops at home in Iceland to see his family, which he agrees to, officially here in chapter 99, ending the slave arc of the Vinland Saga story. Thorfinn then does indeed go back to his home village, but at first nobody recognizes him, as he had been gone for over a decade and people thought he had died. But when he meets his mother, she recognizes him right away and begins to cry. While his sister Ylva cuts his hair, she reveals to him that he is now 22 years old and should try to settle down with a wife and begin working in the village trade of fishing. While he is somewhat appealed by having that kind of life, he tells the village about him and Einar's mission of creating Vinland. But in order to start a whole new country, they need gold, where they set off to ask Halfdan, the wealthiest man in the area, if he could sponsor their expedition, setting off by boat to see him, where a stubborn little girl and sister-in-law to Leif named Gudrid, similar to what Thorfinn did, hid on the ship in order to come out to sea. Leif tells her that going on voyages is strictly for men and attempts to crush on her dreams of being a sailor, where in response, Gudrid suddenly cuts off her hair in defiance as to be seen more like a boy. Now, with no choice of turning back and Gudrid on their ship, when they arrive to Halfdan's domain, they're viciously attacked by his son Sigurd, as from his perspective, it looks although they were holding Gudrid hostage. That is, until Halfdan breaks it up and it is revealed Gudrid is actually his son's soon-to-be wife. And being of a lower class background, is forced to now wear a blonde wig as to still look appealing for a new husband, who she's lucky to be getting married to as she's of common blood and terrible in any wifely duties. Halfdan then negotiates with Thorfinn about funding his expansion into Vinland, where Leif reveals that years prior, he himself actually tried to inhabit Vinland but was ultimately unsuccessful. Halfdan tells Thorfinn that if he were to lend him supplies, he'd want collateral interest from him, but Thorfinn tells him he has no notable possessions to his name and only has his life to give. Halfdan then tells Thorfinn that instead, if he kisses his boot, he will fund the journey, where a relieved Thorfinn starts to do so eagerly. But this unshamefulness doesn't sit right with Halfdan and the conventional deal ends up falling through. Instead, Thorfinn is given a lot of narwhal tusks to sell in Greece as they are considered a luxury item there and worth a lot of money. Gudrid wants to join, but Leif says unless she can lift this extremely heavy roping, she's out of luck, where using every ounce of her strength is actually able to do it, but is still denied by Leif. She then prepares to get married to Sigurd, where he explains to her the only reason he's wedded a low-class girl is her connection to Leif and the powerful role his farmland could play in Halfdan's trading. The two then start to do the dirty until Gudrid stabs Sigurd and runs away. While running away, she meets up with Thorfinn, Einar, and Leif, again pleading to tag along on their journey as adventuring is her dream, which Thorfinn grants her and recognizes her as an official member of their crew. With Halfdan completely embarrassed for his son to have let his wife escape, Sigurd here vows to track down and capture Gudrid. Thorfinn's group then sets sail, with their first stop being the Faroe Islands. This reminds Thorfinn of how Faroe was the last place he'd seen his father draw a sword, where a man who despised fighting still always kept a sword nearby just in case. Einar then tells Thorfinn that no matter what happens, even if he need draw a sword again, Einar will always be by his side, and knows what Thorfinn's true character is. Continuing on their journey, they then by chance stumble upon Shetland Island and see the aftermath of what looked to be a brutal war. Thorfinn then decides to make a detour here and make sure if there are any survivors that they're alright. At the same time, Sigurd arrives in the Faroe Islands and is bummed out when he hears he just narrowly missed Thorfinn and his crew. On Shetland, Thorfinn is attacked by a vicious dog, but quickly tames it, then leading Thorfinn to a cellar where an ill mother and her son named Carly are hiding out in. The mother pretty much immediately dies, which leaves Thorfinn no other choice but to take care of the baby until he can find someone else to raise it and love it as their own. They then are able to track down a relative of the baby, but he's reluctant to take care of it, because if he did, he puts his family at risk, as the father to that child was a gruesome man who another Viking family are at odds with. So Thorfinn takes it upon himself to raise Carly, at least for the time being. Sigurd catches up with the crew, where Thorfinn lies to him, saying that Gudrid had fallen off the boat while at sea, which sends Sigurd into a frenzy. That is, until he sees Gudrid himself, live and well, attempting to escape him, where he begins chasing her, but they leave by ship before he can get her, with their next stop being in Norway. Once they arrive, while admiring seeing this many trees for the first time, Gudrid spots a mysterious cloaked figure lurking in the distance. While discussing what she saw, the group are attacked by a wild black bear, and Thorfinn is forced to fight. Where in what was a dire spot for Thorfinn, an arrow out of nowhere charges in and kills the bear, saving everyone in the group from sudden demise. The one to shoot the bear was the same cloaked individual Gudrid had seen earlier, a skilled hunter named Hild. Gudrid, admiring seeing a woman hunter for the first time, is told that because her family had died, she could not live life as a normal woman and was forced to learn how to hunt. She then says about 8 years ago, a band of warriors had attacked her home village where a young soldier named Thorfinn slit her father's throat right in front of her. Where Thorfinn admits that this soldier was in fact him, and Hild raises her crossbow to shoot him. She then informs them that she in fact poisoned the stew, and their only hope for survival is obtaining the antidote in her possession, then leaving the group into the woods. Everyone is alarmed, Bug Eyes more than others, as he had eaten 5 bowls, but Thorfinn keeps his composure, and approaches Hild to a proper duel, as this is only appropriate for what he did in killing her father. While screaming out and looking for Hild, he realizes quickly that she isn't going to be an easy foe, as she had already set up various tactics and traps to catch Thorfinn when he's off guard. Back with the rest of the crew, they all have an epiphany, thinking that Hild in fact was lying about poisoning the stew, with all but Bug Eyes going to accompany Thorfinn in the forest. We then see a flashback into Hild's life when her family's still alive. She was a very gifted child at all things mechanical and engineering, a tomboy who cared more about her machines than boys. While discussing on her future prospects of finding a husband, Askeladd's Nordic Viking clan bursts through the door, killing her mother and putting her father in arms to fight. Hild runs away and is eventually amidst the chaos reunited with her father, who tells her to remember the teaching of Christ, until they are approached by a young, bloodthirsty Thorfinn. Thorfinn then pounces at Hild's father and kills him promptly, then telling Hild that she ought to start running if she knows what's good for her. She asks what her or her family have done to deserve this horror, where Thorfinn callously murks, "I am the hunter and you are the hunted." It's just as simple as that. Hild then runs away from oncoming soldiers, falling into a marsh, which saves her life. She wakes the next day with various injuries inside the tent of a campsite to an unfamiliar but seemingly genuine guy who tells her he will teach her how to hunt. He takes her under his wing as apprentice, where while being a tough teacher, does show Hild many valuable skills. He often wielded a crossbow, who, intrigued, one day Hild tries to load herself, but soon finds out this type of weapon cannot be used by women, then embarking to design a new machine of similar variety that is accessible for herself. Once she amasses a finished product, her and her master sit atop a mountain to hunt a bear, where after missing a shot, her master is mauled to death, leaving Hild alone to defend herself, which she does, killing the bear with her newly made crossbow. Back to current time, after shooting an arrow and missing, Thorfinn finds Hild and begins to charge her, until she swiftly reloads her bow and shoots him twice in each leg. While helpless, immobile, and on the ground, Hild says to Thorfinn that "I am the hunter and you are the hunted." It's as simple as that. As she's about to kill him, Einar arrives, screaming that even though Thorfinn has a horrible past, he truly is a changed man, and only wants to make up for his past wrongs. But Hild isn't buying it. She knows all too well the violence of human nature, and doesn't for a second believe a Norse warrior could ever be anything else. Thorfinn then pleads to her that as soon as he can atone from his sins and build the ever-illustrious land of Vinland, Hild may kill him, but until then, he still has work to do on the earth. Where after feeling a presence of both her deceased father and master, allows him to live and make amends of his life, but she will be right there along with him to make sure of it, as if he doesn't hold his word, she will kill him on the spot. Thorfinn is then knocked out by Hild, where he wakes up the next day to Einar informing him that the poison was just a ruse and they're going to be okay, beside Thorfinn having to remain bedridden until spring due to injury. They then both agree on what they already had established: neither is allowed to die until they create the peace nation of Vinland and avenge Arnheid. We then touch bases again with our good pal Thorkel, who after hearing a family arguing, smashes down their wall, thinking that there might be a battle. It had been over a year since Thorkel had seen violence and was thus suffering from battle withdrawal. Come spring of that year, both Karli and Thorfinn are finally successful in walking. The crew then wonders where Sigurd could be, as he hadn't caught up to them in quite some time, where we see that Sigurd has been more than occupied, running away from various pirate fleets, even leading to him being captured and sold into slavery. Out of sheer boredom, Thorkel then wrestles with a bear and beats it, then reuniting with Floki, who has some special news to tell him, but it isn't revealed to the readers right away. Thorfinn's crew then arrives in Jelling in order to do some trading, where they find Sigurd and his men lined up in auction as slaves. While it's happening, Thorfinn is approached by some of Thorkel's men, forcing him into a meeting with Thorkel, which he reluctantly agrees to. Thorfinn then reunites with Thorkel, who right off the bat attempts to kill him as part of their ongoing duel before they start chatting as if friends. Floki is also introduced to Thorfinn for the first time, and once he hears he is the son of Thor's, his mood quickly changes. Floki tells them that now about to be turning 50, he's not fit to lead the Jomsvikings the same as he used supposed to, where Thorkel volunteers Thorfinn to hold this position of power, but he turns it down and exits the conversation. Then, when Thorfinn and his crew are back on their boats, they get attacked by 2 warships sent by none other than Floki, where their crew gets split up onto their 2 respective ships, and Thorfinn remains on the run against the Jomsvikings. The now 2 separated groups plan to unite again at the town of Odense once Thorfinn is away from conflict. While trying to escape, Thorfinn and Hild eventually get caught by the Vikings on an island, where after they started ransacking and burning down civilian property, Thorfinn willingly turns himself into the clan in order to stop the madness. But the Jomsviking tell him that all they'll be needing is his head, and he should prepare to fight. Thorfinn is thrown a sword out of respect, but he passes, then proceeding to kick everyone's ass. After many defeated, 2 traitor soldiers unveil their mask and reveal to Thorfinn that they are in fact in the commander Von's crew, a decent Danish war general, and were just posing as Jomsvikings. They then request Thorfinn to aid them in their conquest to defeat Floki. Thorfinn declines, but then realizes that with Floki still alive, what happened on this island will only continue to further transpire, and reluctantly does aid them in the fight to dethrone Floki. Floki then hears word of his men letting Thorfinn escape and orders for his execution. Floki's grandson Baldur is also almost killed broad day by an assassin if it weren't for the pompous but extremely powerful mercenary Garm saving his life. Touching bases with Sigurd, hard at work in the slave trade, in a moment of exhaustion, wails that he refuses to work and would rather be killed than continue on here. Thorkel then entertains his ploy, where an awestruck Sigurd laments over meeting the one and only Thorkel the Tall in the flesh. Thorkel is also given a gift by Canute in the form of one of his top guards, Wolf, and being his watchdog. Thorfinn then meets Von, who is ecstatic to have recruited the son of Thors, then in a way spilling some beans, mentions how Floki was the one who orchestrated the killing of his father. This fact ignites a flame in Thorfinn he thought had long went out and was now seeping with hunger to go defeat Floki. He then reflects on this anger and realizes that no matter what, if he were to see Floki, despite his "I have no enemy" saying, he couldn't control himself not to rip his head straight off his body. So when Von says they are to go to Jomsburg to confront Floki, Thorfinn says he will sit out as to remain peaceful, as Canute will deal with Jomsburg himself anyways. As this is happening, Thorkel abruptly arrives to come attack Von, as at the moment he is still in alliance with Floki, sided with his men including Sigurd, who is fighting alongside Thorkel as his slave. But he's severely upset when he finds Von's head already severed from his body from now who is unmasked as a traitor, Garm, who then finds Thorfinn and chases after him as to murder him as well to get a hefty reward from Floki. Unwillingly, Thorfinn is forced to entertain Garm, who, almost like an archer with his accuracy with his spear, manages to get some solid hits on Thorfinn to the groin and the face, until Thorfinn finally manages to escape him. Thorkel riles up his men by burning down Sigurd's ship and spreading a longing to now kill Floki, as even though he was just fighting for him, with Von dead, Thorkel only blindly wants to fight whoever seems the most fun opponent, regardless of an actual motive. Leif, Einar, Gudrid, Karli, and Bug Eyes then arrive at the meeting place, now only waiting for Thorfinn and Hild, where they are approached by a young girl asking if they knew who Thorfinn was. After saying yes, Garm, who the young girl had been in alliance with, interrogates them on Thorfinn's whereabouts until he surrounds them, holding them captive. Bug Eyes attempts to appear as a more stoic warrior than he is, as a means to catch Garm off guard, but he is unsuccessful, although this does prevent him from being captured the same as the others. They're then taken back to Jomsburg and kept captive there under Floki, who is greatly disappointed in Garm's killing of Von and Thorfinn's escape from his grasp, and initially locks him up as to give him to Thorkel as condolences for killing Von, not knowing that on arrival, Thorkel plans to fight. Thorfinn and Hild then arrive at the designated meeting spot, where Bug Eyes tells him of the rest of the crew's situation, forcing Thorfinn to have to go into Jomsburg to save them, which he knows deep down in his heart will only lead to him killing once again. This also means both Thorfinn and Thorkel are heading into Jomsburg to fight not necessarily as allies, but against the same common enemy of Floki. Sigurd as well, instead of being mad at the burning of his ship, actually becomes inspired and enthusiastic to fight side by side with none other than Thorkel the Tall and prove himself a worthy swordsman. When Thorkel arrives to Jomsburg, Garm, who is being given to Thorkel as slave for killing Von, starts running his mouth, telling Thorkel he could murder him in mere seconds, leading the two to begin a duel, resulting in a tie that they plan to resume on a later date, afterward letting Garm free to once again set out after Thorfinn. Also, power scale wise, this shows that Garm is at least comparable to Thorkel in strength. Floki's grandson Baldur lets those in Thorfinn's crew imprisoned in Jomsburg outwardly disguised as Jomsvikings, as he feels as though it is his fault the war is ongoing and that they are locked up. While helping them escape after telling them of his his longing for peace, is offered to come join on their voyage of Vinland, but in the midst of the ongoing attack, can't give them a definitive answer. In battle, Thorkell gets toppled with logs from Floki that are then lit on fire in attempts to slay him, but this doesn't quite take out the great Thorkell. Thorfinn then arrives in Jomsborg amidst the battle, where he is bombarded with questions and orders from various parties, which he promises to solve all of. We then see two warriors about to be executed speak about going to Valhalla, where one man says he can't wait to die, as up there you can eat, drink, and fuck every night, where the other man plainly states that that just sounds like what they already lived through, there in his final moments, wishing he had devoted his life to something more meaningful than being a warrior and getting into Valhalla, before both men are killed. Thorfinn and Hild then sneak into Jomsborg's main barracks to retrieve Gudrid and are helped by a servant girl named Nana. Following behind them, Sigurd and his men go through the same secret entrance Thorfinn had, but they unluckily end up getting caught and pursued by guards. Garm, however, uses no secret entrance to get into the base and just storms past guards, killing a fleet of men to gain his admission. Sigurd then lights an inside base house on fire as a signal to Thorkell, where, out the blue, one of his men asks if he really even loves Gudrid to put this much effort into saving her, which makes him question himself. Thorfinn then reunites with Gudrid and, for the first time, meets Baldur, who, while talking about their shared virtue of disliking war, is interrupted by Floki, barging in and ordering his guards to attack. Thorfinn, now seeing the man he knows responsible for his father's death, is blinded by rage, swinging in to kill Floki until Baldur throws himself atop of him and asks Thorfinn to kill him instead. Snapping back to reality, knowing that killing is wrong, he takes his sword over his knee and breaks it, sparing Floki of his death before fleeing undercover with Baldur and Gudrid. The guards are then seen filling up the well they snuck in from, their only plan for escape, where, wanting to leave behind his current affairs, Baldur offers himself as captive so that Thorfinn and Gudrid can leave freely. As this commences, Sigurd and his men, running from guards, are caught up with Thorfinn and, by association, now in the middle of the newly big spectacle of the chief's grandson being held captive at knife point. Thorfinn only asks for a cut and dry trade-off from Floki. In exchange for his grandson's life, him, Gudrid, and Hild are to leave freely through the compound's gates. As this standoff is happening, Garm is watching from a distance, plotting to join in on all the fun, then jumping in, challenging Thorfinn to yet another duel in maybe the worst possible scenario imaginable. With no other real option, Thorfinn is forced to let go of Baldur and engage Garm, which causes a huge frenzy. Thorfinn, after initially fighting him, then tries to run away from Garm, to which Garm only pursues him, completely disregarding the new predicament he found himself in, acting extremely careless and manic. And Sigurd grabs Baldur and holds him at knife point as the gates open that was meant for their escape. Now able to actually get away, Gudrid questions why Sigurd is still holding Baldur captive, where he says someone needs to protect the gate until Hild knocks him out and takes his position, with Sigurd then being carried away by Gudrid. Garm gets a very clean hit on Thorfinn with his spear, which incapacitates him to keep running and once again readies up for battle. Thorfinn doesn't want to fight, in stark contrast to Thorkell, finally once again back in battle, covered in bloodshed, having the time of his life. Garm, after noticing Thorfinn never truly actually fights back when they duel, aptly gives him his perspective on war. He says he fights simply because it's fun. War is a game everyone loves playing, and what is life but not to enjoy it? Thorfinn then says if war is a game, he'll expect his invite from Garm to fight, tossing his blade to the side, saying this is how real experts play. The two then fight each other at full force, where in a moment of weakness, Garm is rendered unconscious by Thorfinn. We see a flashback of a young Garm who was ridiculed by his family for being excessively violent, until warriors recruited him to kill a man, where they become his new family. Garm then wakes up and admits Thorfinn is truly an expert and the better warrior, asking if next time they meet, they can fight again. Thorfinn says he'd rather the next time they meet, they be friends, where Garm says that they already are friends, before leading back into the battlefield. Here, Floki realizes he's going to lose to Thorkell and plans to cut his losses and abandon Jomsborg, but before they can do so, Thorkell hurls into the wall of his office, yelling, "There's Floki," recreating the classic Shining scene.
Here's Johnny!
Floki then brings out his secret weapon Ymir, a beast entity that holds up Thorkell. Baldur also runs away, grabs a blade, and attempts to unalive himself, but he's unsuccessful. After battling into the morning, Floki is defeated, and the duel between Thorkell and Ymir commences, with Thorkell victorious. But when a soldier goes to murder the beast, Thorkell screeches, saying not to kill it, as he'll never find a more fun battle partner ever again. Gudrid then informs Thorfinn that she in fact would be leaving with Sigurd back to Iceland, where Thorfinn is once again offered leadership leadership of the Jomsviking, which this time he surprisingly accepts. Now as chief, he is ordered to execute both Floki and Baldar himself, but instead, now being the complete dictator of the Jomsvikings, he issues 3 separate orders. 1, Floki and Baldar will not be executed and instead be exiled by cargo ship from Jomsburg. 2, Jomsburg as a station is officially disbanded and their slaves are to be set free immediately. And 3, the Jomsvikings warrior clan as we know it will disassemble and any further violence from them is to be forever ceased. Causing him to drink, but overall he actually takes it better than expected, only telling her that if Thorfinn doesn't reciprocate, she's still binded to come back to Iceland with him, but leaves before even knowing. On his way back home, he saves Ylva's children who were for some reason stranded on an island, returning them back to her. He then reunites with his father, informing him that his mission to retrieve Gudrid was unsuccessful. But he also asks if he could be a free man and continue his travels, not having to be the heir to his father's name, which Halfdan disavows, tying him up as slave. Until his childhood friend and first wife Halgerd frees him, but they're caught by Halfdan yet again. Halfdan then explains to Sigurd why he must inherit his father's estate, but he still only wants to travel, and the two begin to battle, where Sigurd actually beats his father and thus begins following his dream and travel, only leaving his father with an order that if Thorfinn come back to Iceland, he's obliged to offer him support in his affairs of Vinland. We then have a time skip of 2 years, making it now 1021 AD, where Thorfinn returns to his home village, and we find out that Thorfinn did indeed love Gudrid back, and the two were now family. He also comes manned with gracious amounts of supplies, seeking anyone from his home village to come aid and live in the soon-to-be community of Vinland. As well as again having a meeting with Halfdan, who, after successfully selling the narwhal tusk he had gifted them, graciously uses the funds Thorfinn owed him to have him and Gudrid's own proper wedding ceremony, officially making the two husband and wife. We then see that Thorfinn still has his reoccurring nightmare of everyone he's killed dragging him to hell, but now he's actually in the works to repenting for it. They then start to plan out their timeline for before they can start Vinland, where Bug Eyes reveals to the crew he won't be joining them in Vinland, only voyaging with them to get his share of wealth from the narwhal tusks. Thorfinn then tries to rally up more volunteers for this new way of life, informing them that no swords are allowed to be present on Vinland, which dissuades a face-tatted potential candidate named Ivar. Back at his home, Thorfinn is paid a visit from a huge escaped slave named Cordelia, who is revealed to be Thorkel's son, wishing to join them on their journey to Vinland. Cordelia, although male, was raised as female by their mother, as so to protect them from their father Thorkel, bringing them into a life of war. Eventually, as Cordelia aged and began to more and more resemble their father, them and their mother fled to escape from Thorkel as to not find out their lie, but it didn't go as planned, and Cordelia ended up a slave to Halfdan. Halfdan then barges in to retrieve his slave, where Thorfinn cuts him a deal that Halfdan can have his own farm on Vinland, and Cordelia can be the one to tend to it for him. Ivar then argues with Thorfinn that because they're going to encounter potentially hostile natives, he should be able to bring a sword, but Thorfinn stays firm on his position, saying that any peace brought from a sword is not true peace at all. Hild, however, doesn't like this and reminds Thorfinn that a sword is not to blame for the wickedness of man. Thorfinn then has a talk with Halfdan where he comes to a conclusion on how he'll keep peace with the natives without the threat of violence. He has an epiphany that mutual peace can be built on dependence. If two parties both need each other to properly survive, they are forced into a pact of tranquility with the other. He explains this to Ivar, who then decides he'll come on board. Halfdan also asks Thorfinn if he would be his son-in-law and inherit his land, until his real son Sigurd shows back up, now with a wife and a kid. While meeting his grandson, Sigurd's son mutters grandpa, and then and there, believing this child to be a genius, says that this newborn is to be the one to inherit his farm. Then come springtime, everyone sets sail into Vinland. We then have another short time skip where Thorfinn goes into Greenland to pick up any volunteers for Vinland, where we see that Leif, in his old age, has began going senile, and Bug Eyes left Greenland for Norway after hitting it big gambling. Leif also gives Thorfinn his old tobacco pipe, saying that when natives on Vinland call you to smoke, you must, as that's very important to them. A group of ruffians then unexpectedly arrive at the village with Bug Eyes, who, after racking up a massive debt gambling, was forced to pay up literally all the money he owned, and then dead broke, decide he changes his mind about living in Vinland. The crew, with Bug Eyes now included, make their way into Vinland, where after thinking they might have taken a wrong route, are scared they might fall off the edge of the earth. But Hild says that that won't happen, as the earth is in fact a sphere, which was not common knowledge at the time, which Carly weirdly understands as well, despite his age. Either way, they were correct in missing their route though, as instead of ending up in Vinland, they end up in North America. They then go on to start south to Vinland, but some of the people coming from Greenland decide decide that they want to live here instead, which upsets Einar as Vinland is supposed to be a united nation. But Thorfinn is okay with this, saying that this could be a valuable checkpoint for Vinland as an allied community between them and their homeland. After this, the rest of the gang that didn't want to stay in America starts traveling south and does indeed actually arrive in Vinland, and everyone is ecstatic. That is, until they find an arrow that obviously came from an extremely hostile native group called the Skrellings, and they decide they should set up their community farther south. Thorfinn makes a rule that they will continue south until they find a place that meets his 5 conditions. 1. The land must be an inlet as to make housing boats easier. 2. There must be a close supply of fresh water. 3. There must be many forests as they'll need plenty of trees when building the faction. 4. The terrain is to be smooth and flat so to make good farmland. And 5. For Thorfinn the most important, the land must not belong to anyone else. They do eventually find an area that meets all the criteria, but they can't be certain of the 5th one until they investigate, which they do. They do find a native group, but they don't attack them on sight, which is a very good sign. Thorfinn then leaving them gifts as to become friendly with them. Everyone then begins to start building up the community, setting up a stone statue of a woman Einar found in Greece. Right in the center, they name Arnheid, later coining the entire village as Arnheid Village. They also find out that their plot of land is actually on an island, which leads Ivar into a heated exchange with Thorfinn, as he feels because of this, they will definitely need weapons to defend themselves, but Thorfinn doesn't budge. While they're hard at work, the natives spy on the white foreigners to see what they're about, later debating if they should attack or not. A village elder says he's dealt with whites in the past and knows what they're doing. They're trying to make farmlands, and while this is a good thing, it also destroys the forest, which is deeply rooted in their culture, and it's up to everyone to decide whether they want to allow this or not. The natives then finally approach Thorfinn, but due to their language barrier, not much is communicated, but overall, the exchange is very friendly. The only person out of line being Ivar, who, thinking the natives were going to attack, reveals that he broke a fundamental rule of Vinland and brought a sword, but nobody notices besides Cordelia. After a peaceful confrontation, the natives and the Nords begin a successful trading relationship, and all seems well, but the natives are growing increasingly weary about the sheer amount of trees the Nords have been cutting down. The Nords also get into a dispute about who gets to own which percentage of land, which causes static in the faction. Ivar also coercing Cornelia into being on his side with the whole weapon dispute unbeknownst to Thorfinn. He was too busy dealing with his son, who had got into an argument with his friends, telling him he should apologize and wishing he could do the same to everyone he's hurt. A curious young native girl attempts to better understand the settlers, meeting various characters that make up the Nords of Vinland. A native elder performs a ritual that depicts to him a seriously awful future for his people if they let the Nordic live with them, filled with slavery, plague, greed, but most of all, violence. We then see a flashback where a bunch of Viking men are ordered to be killed by King Canute. At first, they're happy to be killed as this is a surefire way to get into Valhalla until Thorfinn questions the validity of Valhalla, questioning if it's even real, and if it is it really a satisfying way to live your life and die by? The men are then granted a choice by Canute of either dying there and going up to Valhalla, or going with Thorfinn to start Vinland, where after a change of heart, they decide to live. Back to present time, the village is struck in a moment of good fortune. Hild designs a mechanism that allows the village to now be able to produce bread. The Nords' relationship with the natives seems to be growing stronger and stronger, and Gudrid informs Thorfinn that she is in fact pregnant with his child. Hild also tells Thorfinn that he has truly atoned for his sins, and she no longer holds any anger towards him, which causes Thorfinn to start crying. He then puts up a tombstone intended for all the people Thorfinn has ever killed in war. Returning from a voyage to Greenland, a townsman speaks on when stopping at the Markland base getting attacked by the native tribe, with Thorfinn, Ivar, and some others traveling there to investigate. When they arrive, they find that nobody is present and the 13 colonists who were to set up base there presumably murdered. This enrages Ivar that part of his people were killed by natives who can't even use iron tools, an easily avoidable massacre if they had just been with weapons. Thorfinn comes home and informs the main base, where people begin to grow speculative about the native tribe's friendliness. While the native elder who had performed the ritual, seeing the future for the tribe, warns his people of the impending doom they'll experience if they don't keep these Norsemen in check. But the majority of the village actually enjoy having the whites around, and this is ruled out by the chief, at least for the time being. Ivar starts building a barrier around the village in case they have potential attacks, which upsets Thorfinn, but after the Markland incident, more and more residents are growing in favor of this. So in response, Thorfinn holds holds a town meeting on whether or not Arnheid Village should be armed or not, where Cordelia reveals that Ivar in fact brought a sword to Vinland, but it doesn't matter as all the men of the village sided on the team of being armed, so thus as majority, that is the catalyst. That is, until the native tribe comes to speak to them, and after sharing a smoke from a tobacco pipe, say that they wish to continue being allied with the Norse and keep on trading. Beside the one village elder who had seen the horrible prophecy of the future, who raised an axe to Thorfinn, wishing to kill him, if he wasn't stopped by Ivar, slicing off his hand with the banned sword. This causes a frenzy that makes the natives retreat to their base, most likely second-guessing the relationship with the Nords, despite it being one of their people, igniting the conflict. As they leave, Thorfinn notices that the village elder, whose hand had been sliced off, was laughing, and realizes that he was only trying to use himself as a pawn to get a conflict between them started. The next day, Thorfinn finds that the natives plan to keep their distance, at least for the time being, with all but a few temporarily leaving their main base. The few that stayed say that the attack will not happen again, as everyone else in the village enjoys having the Norse around, and the one who had attacked Thorfinn exited from the village that night anyways. Hild then has a chat with the village youngsters who are increasingly growing pro-war about how war is awful and we should try to prevent it, even having a flashback into her own sickening past with war. She then deduces that both Ivar and the native elder would be the only way they would go into battle, and is thus going to fully 100% make sure the village never sees conflict. Now, after the attack, all the men in the village help Ivar in building the barricade around the village, which upsets Thorfinn and Einar dearly. Einar then asks Thorfinn that if they did go into war, would he run? Where Thorfinn just says that there will be no war no matter what. Where Einar says that he loves his new village more than anything and would never want to leave, implying that if it came down to it, Einar would rather put up a fight for his village than leave. Hild then attempts to kill Ivar until Thorfinn catches on and puts an end to it, then rushing into the wilderness to kill the native elder instead. We then see that there was actually one lone survivor in the Markland base, and he warns the others that there is an incoming disease that killed all the indigenous people in Markland, and Thorfinn should prepare for what is to come. We then cut to Canute, who is killing heaps upon heaps of his people, all to stop an apparent illness running rampant in his territory, and is most likely going to hit Vinland very soon. The Markland survivor, whose name Flod, is then brought to Arnheid Village, where he tells the colony of what happened in Markland. He says that the white settlers there didn't die, but simply just went back to Greenland after arrow attacks from the native tribe, who were experiencing a deadly plague brought by the foreign Nords. He also says that the same thing is bound to happen to the Vinland base, which Ivar points out as a good thing. A disease they're immune to but kills the natives is a great thing in his book, until he's clocked square in the face. Meanwhile, the native tribe of Vinland rally up warriors to go kick the Nords out of their country as to prevent what happened in Markland. Thorfinn, Einar, and Bug-Eyes go to speak with the native people, where Thorfinn declares that come springtime, all Nords will get up and leave Vinland altogether, which Einar, with his entire being, fully opposes, all while Gudrid goes into labor with Thorfinn's child. As this meeting with Thorfinn and the native warriors is going on, a fringe group of natives pillage Arnheid Village, murdering inhabitants, looting houses, and burning down buildings. Thorfinn is then attacked by the natives, who decided they don't want to take up their peace offering, but apprehends them easily, unlike Cordelia, who's forced to take up guard to defend themselves, is being trounced by the natives. Gudrid also does give birth to Thorfinn's child. Ivar is then attacked, who, after getting shot with an arrow, gets his cherished sword taken from him, which is then used to slice his hand off. Thorfinn is also pumped full of arrows by natives, narrowly surviving thanks to Hild rescuing him. He also begins to feel like his one true purpose in life, creating a peaceful nation in Vinland, has been nothing but a complete failure, and a place without war truly being impossible. The next day, the natives plan to have a full-on attack on Arnheid Village, which now, without Thorfinn present, the residents plan to completely disregard the no violence rule and go into war with the natives, with even Einar being ready to go into battle. The women and children are taken by boat away from Vinland to be spared the bloodshed, but Gudrid refuses to leave until Thorfinn comes back. While the battle in Arnheid Village goes into full swing, Einar even getting shot in the head twice, Thorfinn in critical condition is being nursed by Hild and a friendly native somewhere in the woods. And that concludes the complete narrative of Vinland Saga, at least up until this point. I just created a second channel where I'm going to be doing weekly chapter reviews of Vinland Saga, so if you're a fan, definitely go check that out. The link is going to be in the description. This video took a lot of time, so any likes, comments, anything on as far as that goes, would mean a lot to me, being a smaller creator myself. So thank you guys. Other than that, go check out the other channel, and yeah, peace out.